Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington. We are following new developments on Capitol Hill and at Mar-a-Lago amid the fallout from last week's elections. As Republicans hold leadership elections, control of the House remains uncalled, and former President Trump prepares to announce his 2024 candidacy. We will dive into all of it in just a moment, but we do begin with breaking news in Europe as we are following an increasingly tense situation between NATO and Russia. U.S. officials are working to figure out exactly what happened inside NATO territory following reports that 2 people were killed by a Russian missile that hit inside Poland, which borders Ukraine. Now, right now, U.S. officials have not confirmed the incident, but government officials in Poland have confirmed the country's prime minister and its top national security officials are holding emergency meetings. As to what the U.S. knows, a senior administration official tells NBC News that something has hit Poland, but at this time there's no confirmation that it was a Russian missile. A NATO official tells NBC News they are looking into these reports as well and closely coordinating with Poland. We also heard from officials at both the Pentagon and State Department this afternoon that the U.S. was working with the Polish government and NATO officials to gather more information and to determine what additional steps would be necessary. Now, the Russian Ministry of Defense, meanwhile, is saying that Russian firepower has launched no strikes at the area between the Ukrainian-Polish border. Ukrainian President Zelensky, on the other hand, put out a video this afternoon where he said point blank that Russian missiles hit Poland. This increasingly tense situation is playing out as President Biden is in Bali right now for meetings with G20 nations with Russia. This is new video of Russia's foreign minister attending tonight's G20 dinner. You see him right there. To break this all down, I'm joined now by senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell, who's traveling with the president in Bali, and NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter is in Kyiv. We're also joined by former U.S. ambassador to Russia and an NBC News international analyst Michael McFaul and former U.S. ambassador to NATO Ivo Dodler. Thanks to all of you for being with us. And Kelly, I want to start with you. What has the reaction been? Obviously, the White House is working to try to determine exactly what, if anything, happened here.
And, Kristen, knowing we would be speaking now, I just did another round of check-ins with senior White House officials in the last couple of minutes. And in contacting 2 of them, they both say that they still cannot confirm that this was a Russian strike. So the information process is still working. What we have been told is that the U.S. government is working with Polish allies, who are, of course, a part of NATO, trying to assess what happened on the ground. They're also working through the State Department, the Department of Defense, and so forth. Getting to the ground truth is what one senior official had said is so critically important here. And why? Why the context? We know that President Biden has a number of times said that the U.S. and allies would defend every inch of NATO territory, and Poland is a critical player in that. The U.S. has sent additional U.S. forces to support Poland. We know that Poland has been receiving many of the refugees from Ukraine. There's a long partnership there. What is unclear now is what exactly happened. Was it intentional? Was it accidental? Those questions need to be answered. I've been in touch with U.S. senators who say they are also trying to get information and that there have been rumors that have been knocked down. There's that fog of war in these early stages where people are trying to get good information to help them shape what the next steps will be. We also know that it is expected the president's schedule will remain as it is now. He is here at the G20 with other world leaders, so it is in some ways the perfect way for him to convene with others who need to make some decisions about what should happen next. Ukraine has been central to these discussions in many ways, trying to keep pressure on Russia. As you saw that clip there of Sergei Lavrov, who's been here in place of Vladimir Putin as the foreign minister. And there have been questions about what should these allies try to do. There have been, of course, lots of support in military and aid and so forth, and then questions about how to pressure Russia to maybe go to peace talks, and then, of course, all the humanitarian aspects about what to do about the food and energy insecurity that results from this. But what has happened in Poland, determining what that is and what the consequences should be, is potentially a turning point and a critical one. It is just 5 in the morning here. And so we've got to see how this plays out. But critical connections are happening. NATO, the U.S., and partners like Poland are trying to get the facts and then make decisions about what comes next. Kristen? Kristen.
All right, Kelly O'Donnell, you have been on top of this since the beginning. Incredible reporting. Thank you, as always. Molly Hunter, let me turn to you on the ground there in Kyiv. Has there been any reaction? Obviously, we talked about the very strong language that President Zelensky used, but what else are you hearing there?
Yeah, I think we've just started to hear from Ukrainian officials. Clearly, they have been working the phones. They have been in meetings as well. You mentioned that statement from President Zelensky. And I'm just going to actually read a line from it because he does not mince words. He says, terror is not limited to our national borders. Russian missiles hit Poland. He continues to fire missiles at NATO territory. This is a Russian missile attack on collective security. This is a significant escalation. Now, we have also just heard, Kristen, just in the last few minutes from the foreign minister here, Dmytro Kuleba, who just tweeted out, Ukraine reaffirms its full solidarity with Poland and stands ready to provide any necessary support. Collective response to Russian actions must be tough and principled. Among immediate actions, he says, a NATO summit with Ukraine's participation to craft further joint actions, which will force Russia to change its course on escalation, providing Ukraine with modern aircraft such as F-15s and F-16s, as well as air defense systems so that we can intercept any Russian missiles. Of course, those are air defense systems and F-16s that they have been asking for. He ends his tweet, Kristen, by saying today, protecting Ukraine's skies means protecting NATO. Now, today was the widest, the broadest Russian aerial bombardment that this country has seen since the beginning of the war, according to Ukrainian officials. Now, President Zelensky said more than 90 missiles were fired at this country, and not just at the capital, not just in the east. Every major city, according to the state's energy company, was hit, and they were targeting critical infrastructure. Kristen, when critical infrastructure is targeted, though, it means civilians are in the dark. Now, Lviv, that western city that we have spoken a lot about, it is near the border. Whether or not those missiles, those rockets were targeting critical infrastructure around Lviv, we don't know. We do know, though, from Lviv's mayor, 80% of that city tonight is without electricity. So that western city got hit hard as well. Here in the capital, Kristen, we know 50% of civilians are without electricity tonight.
The images are just so disturbing, and so are the reports. All right, Molly Hunter, thank you so much. Please do continue to stay safe. Ivo, let me turn to you and get your reaction. Again, this is still a moment where everyone is gathering information. So take us inside what's happening at NATO right now. What is NATO doing right now to try to determine exactly what happened here?
Well, NATO is trying to get the same kind of information that the U.S. government is trying to get, that the Polish government is trying to get in order to find out what, in fact, happened. Is this a Russian missile? There are reports from the Poles directly that it might have been a Ukrainian air defense system. Of course, it's the Russians who shot close to 100 missiles at Ukraine, and the Ukrainians have every right to defend themselves against those missiles. So we just need to get the facts. That's number one. I know that the Secretary General of NATO will be on the phone as soon as the National Security Council meeting with in Poland ends to talk to the Poles. I know the U.S. government will be doing the same thing. And I expect we will have a meeting early tomorrow morning, Brussels time. It's now 11 o'clock there. Early tomorrow morning, Brussels time, to have a NATO meeting, which the Poles will ask for, to consult on the best way forward. What kind of response will we put together? And importantly, to exchange as much information as possible. This is a time, as Kelly said, of the fog of war. We don't know exactly what's happening. It's important that we find out the facts, exactly what the facts are, and then decide collectively. And this will be a NATO decision, no doubt about it. It's NATO territory, so it will be a NATO decision about how and indeed even whether to respond militarily.
And Ambassador Dodler, one more question for you before we get to Ambassador McFaul. I was speaking to an administration official who said, look, it is going to take time to figure out exactly what happened here. Can you give us a sense of what type of timeline we are looking at before we may actually be able to have some clarity?
It's a matter of days, not weeks or months, to get this information. I mean, the most important information will be first to look at the actual fragments of the missiles that landed on Poland, to see where they came from, to see what origin they are. Secondly, we'll be looking at the kind of data that we have from satellites that tracked the missile launches, both that the Ukrainians were tracking, and that presumably we and others were tracking, and to analyze that. But it won't take that long to figure out whether this was what kind of strike it was and how to think about it. And it's that information that's necessary to then put together a viable and effective response.
Ambassador McFaul, is that the timeline that you are tracking as well? Days, not hours or weeks, say? And can you give us what your key questions are right now as we try to learn exactly what happened?
Yeah, I agree with Ivo. It's hours or days, not weeks and months. They'll be able to locate the fragments. They'll be able to tell where they're from. There's some ambiguity because the Ukrainians use, Soviet-style, Soviet-era weapons as well. But I think we'll figure that out pretty soon. The second big question, was it on accident or on purpose? I think we'll figure that out pretty quickly. And then the third will have to be what Ivo was alluding to. What kind of response do you have from NATO? My own view is there has to be some response if it was the Russians, even if it just was a mistake. And I think this should be a wake-up call for everybody who was hoping that somehow the Ukraine war wasn't our war, that it was far away, that it didn't bother us, it doesn't matter to us. Many of us have been saying, no, it matters to us. It's right on the border of our alliance. And many of us have been worrying about this very day from the very beginning. And I hope that's a wake-up call for those that think this is not our war.
Yeah, in fact, you already have a number of statements in solidarity from Eastern European countries. Let me just read a few of them from Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, from the Czech Republic, all standing in solidarity with Poland, Ambassador Dalder. And yet, again, we do not know what has happened there. But what is the significance of this show of support, this show of unity?
You know, it's very significant. NATO exists fundamentally as an alliance in which everyone has each other's back. After all, Article 5, which is the collective security commitment, says that an attack against one shall be regarded as an attack against all. So it's very important that countries come out and make clear that they stand shoulder to shoulder with the Poles. That's one thing. How to respond to this is something else, and we need to do that on the basis of having the right kind of information. And I think the Poles and those who are already expressing solidarity will press for that information before decisions are made, and then the decisions will be made, and they will be made collectively, and they will be made and executed, I imagine, by NATO, because this wasn't an event that occurred on NATO territory. And
we hear that attack against one is an attack against all. I want to play what President Biden said in September. Take a listen and then get your reaction on the other side.
America is fully prepared with our NATO allies to defend every single inch of NATO territory. Every single inch. So, Mr. Putin, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. Every inch.
Ambassador McFaul, you said, look, if this was not intentional, there should still be some reaction if, in fact, something did happen here. What does that mean in terms of a scaled-back response? What do you think would be potentially appropriate?
Well, the first thing to not forget, my hypothesis is correct, that this was an errant rocket that was part of this massive, unprecedented attack against civilians in Ukraine, we need to respond to that as well. This is a terrorist attack that we have not seen since the beginning of the war. And I hope, because we're focused just on Poland, rightly so right now, we don't forget about that and respond to that as well. In my mind, that means, massively qualitatively new sanctions and more weapons at a greater speed and better weapons to the Ukrainians. Second, I think there will be deliberations, and there should be, within the NATO alliance about how to fortify that border, how to protect that border in a much more robust way. We've been doing that already, but of course, we need to now revisit what we're doing and think about better ways to protect it. In terms of air defense systems is what I'm talking about in particular. Not anything offensive. I think that would be highly unlikely, but defensive, most certainly, on the border especially.
I want to ask you both big picture about where we are in this war right now. Ambassador Dalder, you have President Biden there at the G20 summit, and one of his key goals was to re-energize allies in terms of unifying around Ukraine as they now enter the winter season, Russia continuing to bombard key areas. What do you think was achieved at the G20 summit, and do you see any off-ramp?
So I think Vladimir Putin always can be counted on, and certainly since the beginning of this war, to unify the West by his actions, as Mike rightly said, nearly 100 missiles on civilian targets. This is the kind of brutality that needs to be condemned, and I think it's strengthened President Biden's hand in this G20 to get people to understand that this war needs to end, and it ends by Russia withdrawing its troops from all of Ukraine. I think where we are in this war is where we've been for a while, which is that the Ukrainians are winning and the Russians are losing in a very fundamental way. The real question is, what are the Russians going to do in response to the realization that they're losing this war, a war they started, that war that was completely unnecessary, a war of aggression that violates every norm and every international law on the books. And the worry has been, and the worry continues to be, that as the Russians found themselves cornered in a place they put themselves in, they will try to find a way out through escalation. And one of the reasons we worry about this kind of scenario is by trying to bring in other countries, by trying to bring in NATO to sow division among the allies about how to respond and whether or not to support Ukraine. My sense is he'll fail, just like he has failed all along. We'll find a stronger, more united NATO that will start doing the kinds of things that Mike outlined as soon as tomorrow.
Ambassador Fall, very quickly, final word to you. President Zelensky has said he's not going to go back to the negotiating table until Putin withdraws all of his troops from Ukraine. Is that realistic? Do you see any hope for peace talks at this point?
Well, first, I want to put a bigger context. Putin has lost this war. He didn't denazify Ukraine. He didn't demilitarize. He didn't take Kiev. He didn't take Kharkiv. He didn't take Kherson. I think the history is already written. We just don't know how it ends. With respect to peace talks, that is for President Zelensky to decide. He's made very clear he doesn't want to negotiate with Vladimir Putin, and we should be in no place to tell him to do so. That will be a decision on his timetable, and the key player here, of course, is Vladimir Putin. If he wants to end this war, he could do it tomorrow. He could keep marching east and end the war tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay, we will leave it on that point. Really appreciate both of you joining us to help us break down this still very much evolving situation as we learn more. Ambassadors Dalder and McFall, thank you both so much. We will stay on top of this breaking news and bring you any developments throughout the hour as we learn them. Up next, though, major developments in politics today as the GOP inches closer to winning the House amid debates over the leadership and future of the party. Plus, former President Trump expected to launch a 2024 bid for the White House despite some major midterm losses. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Turning to politics now, we have multiple stories developing inside the GOP at this very hour. In a closed-door meeting this afternoon, House Republicans backed Kevin McCarthy as their choice for Speaker of the House by a vote of 188 to 31 over Arizona Republican Andy Biggs. Now, that is a substantial margin, but it also shows McCarthy has some work to do to get the 218 votes he needs to become Speaker if Republicans retake the chamber. And we could know any minute now if Republicans will, in fact, regain control of the House. We'll let you know if they do. They've been inching closer to hitting the 218 seats needed for a majority. But even if they do, it won't be by much, which potentially leaves McCarthy with the enormous challenge of navigating an unruly caucus with a very small margin for error. On the Senate side, Florida Republican Rick Scott announced a challenge to Kentucky Senator Mitch McConnell at a closed-door lunch this afternoon. It's a move he signaled first on Meet the Press. Both McConnell and Scott have faced blame for Republicans failing to flip the Senate last week. The Senate leadership election is scheduled for tomorrow morning. High stakes there, folks. And while Republicans combat these intra-party squabbles in Congress, the GOP nationally is grappling with what to do about former President Trump after voters rejected a number of Trump-backed candidates in key battleground states. Last night, voters rejected one of the former president's most buzzed about endorsements, Arizona gubernatorial candidate Kari Lake. NBC News is projecting Democrat Katie Hobbs will be the state's next governor. Lake has yet to concede and has trumpeted false claims of fraud to sow doubts about elections in Arizona. Now, despite those setbacks for the former president and some Republicans in key states openly casting blame on him for the party's electoral losses, Mr. Trump is expected to announce his 2024 presidential candidacy in just a few hours from now. On Capitol Hill today, the hand-wringing over Trump's influence in the party was on full display as Republican senators were asked about his planned presidential announcement tonight. Here's what they said.
The Republican Party, as we know it, is dead, and we've got to build something better and new. So I like a lot of what President Trump did as president. We need to have a discussion about going forward who's going to be the nominee. But my view is there'll be time for that. It's not even 2023 yet. We've got to have a serious discussion right now about our core convictions.
Would you support Trump in 2024? What do you make of this announcement?
I got one election on my mind, and only one, and it's in Georgia. And it's in 2022.
I think the only thing we should be focused on is December 6th and getting Herschel Walker elected. That's it.
And I think we accomplished a lot positive when Donald Trump was president. If he's the nominee, I would enthusiastically support him. But I also think if he chooses to run, there's going to be a process. There's going to be a debate. We'll see what happens.
I'll support the Republican nominee, but I don't know that it will be him.
Not exactly a full-throated endorsement there. NBC's Ali Vitale is on Capitol Hill with the very latest on this very busy day. NBC's Vaughn Hilliard is on the ground in Florida ahead of tonight's announcement from former President Trump. And NBC's Steve Kornacki is where else but, of course, at the big board with control of the House still uncalled, but getting closer, Steve. We're going to check in with you in just a second. But first, Ali, I got to get to you. This is a very big day for the future of the Republican caucus in the House and the Senate. First, let's talk about the Senate. Rick Scott announcing this challenge to Mitch McConnell to be the Senate Republican leader. Talk about what you're expecting tomorrow. And again, I just want to emphasize this. He first signaled this in an interview with Chuck on Meet the Press.
Yeah, that's exactly right. His non-answer to that question on Meet the Press really teed off this round of will he or won't he. Now, just in the last hour and a half or so, Rick Scott officially challenging Mitch McConnell for Republican leadership. And it's the first challenge that McConnell will face for this role. But if you listen to him just in the last few minutes, I'll show you. He sounds pretty confident. Watch.
I have the votes. I will be elected. The only issue is whether we do it sooner or later, and I think we'll probably have another discussion about that tomorrow.
So what he means there, Kristen, by whether we do it sooner or later is whether or not they end up holding these leadership elections tomorrow. There is a push from about 8 senators on the Republican side to delay these elections until after the Georgia runoff. And Scott is among those calling for that. Of course, for him, it would help him get more time to cobble together the votes that he would need to topple Mitch McConnell, who has been atop this caucus for many, many years and has a great pulse of where his Republican members are at. That being said, we'll wait and see if Scott actually has any momentum here. But we're not necessarily in wait-and-see mode as much anymore here on the House side where I'm standing. Next to me, we've got some empty microphones. That's us waiting to see if Kevin McCarthy, the man who has speaker aspirations, will come and speak with us. But look, what we actually learned today is just how strong McCarthy's support is within his conference. There has been a lot of back and forth from members, especially in the House Freedom Caucus, angry about how Republicans did in the House. Because remember, flipping the House was supposed to be the easy part. There were points in the past few months where McCarthy and other top Republicans were saying that they were going to flip upwards of 20 or 30 seats. Now it looks like if they win the majority, they're going to have just a handful of votes to do it with. McCarthy winning the ballot inside there with 188 votes. That's exactly what we expected, Kristen, not necessarily in vote numbers, but in terms of the fact that he would win. But really what's important is whether or not he gets to that magic number of 218 several weeks from now in January. That one is really important because that's where he goes on the House floor and actually is elected Speaker. But at least for right now, he's cleared this first hurdle.
Okay, and Ali, as you were speaking, we saw the Republican leadership conference there talking. And again, hopefully you'll get some questions at the end of all of this. Let me ask you about what is going to happen tonight, though, with massive implications for the Republican Party. And of course, we just played that really incredible sound of lawmakers responding to the impending announcement by former President Trump. What are Republicans telling you? Clearly, they feel like a number of Republicans feel like he should wait until after the Georgia runoff.
Yeah, a lot of people wish he would wait until after the Georgia runoff. But even I was down in Florida for the last few weeks talking with people who are close to Ron DeSantis, Republican donors, Republican operatives. Not all of them are set on Donald Trump as the automatic future standard bearer of the Republican Party. That was even before what happened last Tuesday night with the elections. That only added further fuel to the fire in this larger reckoning over the future of the Republican Party. And so it makes sense when you see a large reckoning like that, the fact that the status quo is being challenged here in Washington for McConnell, for McCarthy, even for Ronna McDaniel, who heads the Republican National Committee, and certainly as it pertains to Donald Trump. He remade this party in his image, and it's not clear that they want it to stay that way anymore.
It is absolutely not clear, and that's a perfect segue to Vaughn, who has been out on the trail for marathon coverage of the midterms, and he's now starting 2024 coverage. Vaughn, you're there in Florida anticipating this major announcement, as it's been dubbed by former President Trump. What are we expecting to hear in the speech tonight? Because his aides are really trying to stress that this is going to be a buttoned-up speech, but you don't exactly think of buttoned up when you think of former President Trump. So what are you going to be watching for?
Right. What is this, Kristen? November 15th of the midterm year, and Ali is still roaming the halls of Congress after members of Congress. We're suddenly talking about a presidential campaign, and Steve is still at the big board somehow. But here we are, and Donald Trump has been the ever consistent factor or variable in our politics over the last 7 years, and he intends to be a part of it for at least another 6 years. He looks to win the presidency in 2024 to serve another 4-year term. So we could be standing out here in Mar-a-Lago, you, me, and the team, for a while to come if he gets it his way. Tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern, just a few hours from now, we are anticipating him to announce his next run for the presidency here. Of course, he made this announcement ahead of last week's midterm elections. He was anticipating having a stall of individuals, Republican allies, having just come off major victories from Kari Lake in Arizona to Mehmet Oz in Pennsylvania to Tudor Dixon in Michigan to the likes of Tim Michels in Wisconsin. Some of these key players, but most of them they lost. And so now Donald Trump suddenly, after having campaigned alongside of these candidates who really echoed his message, one that we expected to hear as this 2024 message, suddenly he's going to be making this announcement here tonight, having suffered numerous losses with that very message at play. The question is, how does he proceed from here?
And Vaughn, just very quickly, I know you've been talking to a number of his allies. I mean, how much concern is there about those losses, that it signals that this could be a rockier road for the nomination than former Trump was anticipating?
Number one, when talking to Trump allies and voters, importantly, there is a acknowledgement that Donald Trump has been consistently the de facto leader of this Republican Party for years now, and there is no indication of fractures within it. Yes, you have the likes of Wyoming Senator Cynthia Lummis suggesting over the weekend that perhaps Ron DeSantis should be the future here. But in terms of a coalition around a Ron DeSantis, a coalition around a Mike Pence, a coalition around a Glenn Youngkin, you have not seen that yet build into an actual apparatus. Donald Trump, the PACs around him, still have $100 million in the bank here. And if you look at 2022 as an example, yes, the general election did not go as planned, but you saw these Trump-backed candidates win consistently in the major primaries around the country here. When it comes to the Republican voting electorate, you continue to see loyalty to Donald Trump and a consistency that they see him as the leader of this party. And until we see otherwise, those around Trump and those who have been following Republican Party for the last 7 years will tell you, do not take Donald Trump out of the running until he actually begins to lose some major races himself.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Fantastic reporting, Vaughn. Thank you. Good luck tonight. Steve, let me turn to you. You're almost finished with the big board for now. Almost. We're close to being able to call who controls Congress, if in fact it is Republicans, which, as you talked about yesterday, the path is quite narrow for Democrats at this point. Talk about the majority that the Republicans are going to have, how challenging that's going to be. How much room will Kevin McCarthy have to work with?
Yeah, I think that's the big variable here right now. Basically, the math is 216 right now, at least 216 for the Republicans. Democrats at least 207. And you can see there are a dozen here uncalled Democrat versus Republican races. We did just in the last hour or two, NBC News call the 45th District of California. That's Michelle Steele, an incumbent. She'll keep the seat. That moves the Republicans to within 2 of the majority. Where else in this uncalled, this list of uncalled districts could they get the majority first and then potentially pad it? Well, first place to look, I think, the 41st District of California may get an update here later today. Ken Calvert, the Republican, running ahead of his Democratic challenger. Certainly a possibility of a Republican win there, a distinct possibility, as is the case in the 27th District. This is based in L.A. County. Mike Garcia here, Christy Smith. Smith all but conceded the race on Twitter the other day, though our decision desk wants to see more votes before making a call in that race. But again, you're seeing potential Republican victory certainly there. And in the 3rd District of California, you can see here the population in this one's kind of up in the Sierras here. We are waiting on, there is going to be a vote update from the biggest county in this district tonight, we think at 8 Eastern. How big is that update going to be is the question. Will it be enough to kind of make this decisive? That's what we're going to find out. But certainly Republicans are looking at this as a potential win, too. If they just get the 3 I showed you, that puts them at 219. So the Democrats have got to keep them from winning just what I showed you to even be in the game of getting a majority. So from the Republican standpoint, if they win those 3, it's 219. They could conceivably pick up. I think we may find out on Thursday more about the 3rd District of Colorado. That's the Lauren Boebert race. Very close. She does have that lead, though, of 1,100 votes there. So you could, in California 13, this one is really looming as about a 50-50 race. Look at the margin there, about 760 votes. So I think for Republicans, if they can get it to 221, that might be a sort of the high end right now, 221, 222, maybe more realistic, 220, somewhere there. But I think if they could be 220 or above, given where things were a couple days ago, they might take that at this point. A couple of days ago, we were openly asking if they were even going to get to 218, and maybe it was going to be a 1-seat majority. Maybe now more like 220, 221.
Yeah, it gives them a little bit more breathing room there. I do want to follow up with you on something I was just talking to Vaughn about, which is the record that we saw of former President Trump. A number of his endorsed candidates did not do so well. And the common thread was not just ties to Trump, but election denialism. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of his record.
Yeah, I mean, here's just a look at a chart here sort of showing key races around the country here, where Trump weighed in, where candidates won, where candidates lost. And I think a couple things jump out at me looking at this, certainly. You look at the gubernatorial races. So at the very end of the campaign, Trump actually issued an endorsement of Brian Kemp in Georgia. But we know Trump went after Brian Kemp in the Republican primary because Brian Kemp refused to stand with Trump on his claims about the 2020 election in Georgia. So while this technically goes into the 1 column for Trump, Brian Kemp won in Georgia probably because of his distance from Donald Trump. There was a type of voter there in Georgia that didn't really like the Democrats, but also didn't really like Trump, and I think was comfortable with Kemp because of his distance from Trump, his obvious distance from Trump. Ron DeSantis in Florida won in a landslide. Trump endorsed him, but Trump also was taking shots at him by the end of the campaign. So, again, there was distance there. Lombardo in Nevada is not as much distance. That's more of a clear win for Trump. But when you start to look at who lost just up and down here, I think the pattern that emerges, you compare this list to this list, this list of the candidates who lost were just as a whole much more in line with Trump and his emphasis on 2020, the claims he made about 2020. You were hearing a lot more of that from this list than you were from this list.
Well, you laid it out so clearly. Steve Kornacki, as always, thank you so much. We are inching closer to having the final results of these midterm elections. Appreciate your joining us. Still ahead, meet the newly elected House member who led Democrats to an unexpected win against a Trump-backed candidate, capturing a seat that's been held by Republicans for more than a decade. But But first, we've got some really big programming news to share with you. Chuck will be sitting down with former Vice President Mike Pence, and we will have the first bite of that interview right here on Meet the Press Now. That's going to be later this week. Then you can catch the entire interview this Sunday on your local NBC News station on Meet the Press. We'll be right back with more. Stay with us. Welcome back. As we said earlier, Republicans are figuring out what the future of their party looks like as they close in on a slim majority in the House. But they're not the only ones. Democrats are also looking towards their future, which now includes members like my next guest, Congressman-elect Marie Gluesenkamp Pérez, who flipped Washington State's 3rd District. Congratulations. Thank you for being here, Congresswoman-elect.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor.
Well, I want to ask you about this win because your opponent outspent you 3-1. If you looked at all the odds makers, you had a very steep hurdle. So what do you think was the difference? How did you pull this out? And was it more that you won or did your opponent lose?
Yeah, you know, I am so proud. I feel like the district made a choice here. They decided that they had had enough of clickbait politics. And they're ready for a change. They want a Congress that looks like America. I run an auto repair and a machine shop with my husband for a living. I live in a rural community. You know, we get our water from a well. We get our internet from a radio tower. And I think people are hungry for a Congress that looks like America.
Your opponent has not yet conceded. What do you make of that? And how are you going to ensure that voters trust you deserve this office?
Well, I think my opponent is challenged with math. You know, the AP has called it. I'm comfortable waiting until the Secretary of State calls it. But at this point, it's statistically impossible for him to pull ahead.
But I guess the broader climate here, there's so much distrust in our elections. And here your opponent, Joe Kent, is again, not conceding. What is your message to voters who say, well, that must mean that something, you know, wasn't quite right here? How do you make sure that people trust this process?
Right. And that's critical, that we have full faith in our democratic institutions, like our elections. You know, my big advice is to get off Facebook and go talk to your county auditor. These election officials are patriots. They are public servants. They are serving our communities. And we want the right results, not the rushed results. It's better that we have a clear and accurate count, whether it takes, you know, a couple of days or a week. And in Washington State, where we live, we use mail-in ballots. Paper ballots are the gold standard in election security. We can have full confidence that the results are accurate.
Okay. Let me ask you a little bit about what you are going to do in Washington. As you just said, you're a small business owner. You're also a mom. You ran on a platform of wanting to reduce inflation, gun rights. What is your top issue, though? What do you want to see Congress tackle first, and what will you push for?
Well, we have to address the economy, right? I mean, working families like mine, we know if you're not filling up your grocery cart, if you're tallying and trying to do the math on your way out to the checker, a lot of these bigger issues aren't that relevant to you. So we've got to get our economy on the right track for the long-term growth. And I think that we've had a lot of politicians who are sort of short-term corporate raiders. We've got to end the short-term thinking. We've got to play the long game to build an economy. That means reshoring manufacturing. That means rebuilding our career and technical education. The trades, you know, I'm part of the generation where so many of our best trade schools got turned into computer programming schools. I don't know how many computer programmers you hired this week, but I'm willing to bet many people watching are on a wait list for an electrician, a plumber. Those jobs can't be offshored.
And when you think about the mandate that you've been given, how do you walk that line between making sure that any legislation that you support both stays true to your constituents, who, as you point out, you do live in a rural district, but that also you're able to reach across the aisle and get stuff done?
Yeah, I think we're all really focused on the same things in that regard. We want to fix things. We want an economy that works. We want American jobs. We want family wage jobs. And so I really don't think that's a bipartisan issue. We may disagree about how we get there, but look, there are so many Republicans who have stood up to the sort of extremism and the polarization. Those are my allies. Those are the people I want to work with.
Let me ask you about some specifics. Leader McCarthy has indicated that their agenda includes leveraging the debt ceiling with spending cuts. Is that an approach that you would get behind? Would you agree to spending cuts in order to raise the debt limit?
We do need to bring spending under control. I mean, the debt service is becoming a national security issue.
So is that a yes? Would you support that approach?
I'd have to see what exactly that entails. But we also, I'm really tired of playing chicken with the budget. I mean, we can't risk a government shutdown. That is unacceptable as well.
But it sounds like you're saying you could potentially work with Republicans on some spending cuts.
Yes.
Okay. Let me ask you, Leader McCarthy has also said, look, he doesn't think that Congress should write a blank check to Ukraine. Clearly, you have yet again today President Zelensky asking G20 leaders for more military support, more aid. What do you make of those comments? Do you agree with Leader McCarthy, or do you agree that the funding needs to continue to Ukraine?
Yeah, I think it's a reckless statement. I mean, I think the question is should not be how long do we support Ukraine, but let's give them the resources to end this war on their own terms. You know, Russia invaded a sovereign nation, full stop. We have got to stand up to bullies like Putin.
Okay. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has not said whether or not she's going to run for a leadership position. Now, again, we're waiting to see who wins control of the House. But would you support Pelosi running for minority or House Speaker again?
No, I've been clear. I believe that we need change in our leadership.
And have you eyed who you think would be the best person for that?
You know, we don't know who's running yet is the short answer. But in broader terms, I think it's important that we have leadership that is, you know, again, looks like America. I'd love to see people who've been involved with small business. I'd love to see somebody from a rural community. Just a more representative leadership.
And President Biden said he intends to run. He's going to make a final decision in the new year. Would you support, and is President Biden the strongest person to lead Democrats in 2024?
That's a great question. We'll see who throws their hat in the ring.
But do you think right now, if you had to, you know, tell the president right now, do you think that he's the strongest person to represent Democrats?
I mean, I think we still have an incomplete grade at this point. So we'll see how things go.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you
so
much, Congresswoman-elect. Really appreciate your being here, and good luck to you. And you can, I should say also welcome to this Washington. We will have much more on former President Trump's plans for a comeback starting tonight as Republicans grapple with the future of their party. My panel is next, but first, we are celebrating 75 years of Meet the Press all month, and we're diving into the archives for some of the highlights from the past 75 years, and you can dive into the archives on your own, too. Scan the QR code on your screen right now to get more clips and highlights. Here's then-Senator Joe Biden announcing his 2008 campaign for president on Meet the Press.
Are you running for president?
I am running for president.
Are you filing for exploratory committee?
I'll file an exploratory committee before the month is out.
This month?
This month.
And you're going to take on Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and all other comers?
I'm going to be Joe Biden. I'm going to try to be the best Biden I can be. If I can, I got a shot. If I can, I lose.
Welcome back. I am joined now by my great panel, Tia Mitchell, Washington correspondent at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Faiz Shakir, advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders, and Stephen Hayes, editor of The Dispatch and an NBC News contributor. Thanks to all of you for being here. So let's start with what we are all anticipating, this imminent announcement by former President Trump. A lot of people, Stephen, wondering, is there any way that Trump doesn't go through with it tonight, given that so many Republicans are saying, wait until after the Georgia runoff? I'm told he's definitely going to. What's the impact, not just on Georgia, but the political universe right now?
I mean, it's hard to imagine Donald Trump doing something that puts somebody else first. So even if he's being encouraged not to do this for the purposes of getting Herschel Walker elected, I don't think that if he doesn't do it, that won't be the reason he doesn't do it. Look, I mean, what we're looking at right now on the center right, the Republican Party, is the civil war that's been happening on a subterranean level for years. Most of the Republicans on Capitol Hill have opposed Trump, have disliked Trump for as long as I can imagine. We all know, if you talk to any Republicans, you know this, you report on Republicans, they will say one thing in private about Trump, and they will say the opposite in front of the cameras. What we're starting to see is them saying the same thing in public that they've long been saying in private. And this is, you know, the question is, does this moment grow into something where there's all-out combat? It looks like it is. Or does it revert back the way that it has so many times?
I'm not sure what the impact will be in Georgia because Herschel Walker is already very aligned with Donald Trump already. You know, it's not like this is going to be a new revelation to the voters in Georgia that they're close. The question is, does does Trump show up in Georgia? And what would that be? Because we know in 2021, going into those runoffs, he did campaign for Loeffler and Perdue, but he made it about him in election denialism. That didn't go over well with voters. So does Trump come to Georgia, and what is his message if he does try to stump for Herschel Walker? That could have an impact.
Yeah, I think you're so right about that. And, of course, he didn't campaign for him during the race that we all just witnessed, so it will be very fascinating to see if that happens now. And, of course, Kemp is not going to be on the ballot in Georgia. Faiz, what do you think the impact of that will be?
Well, they're just begging Donald Trump to stay out of it, but I imagine it will be constantly an effort by Democrats to ensure that Trump is on the ballot there. So Brian Kemp is caught between a rock and a hard place there because he's lending his field organizers and an organizing operation to Warnock to try to help, to Herschel Walker to help him. Meanwhile, you know, the more he does that, he sounds like he's taking Trump's side, and now he's going to have to comment on Trump. So if you're wading into Trump's candidate, aren't you going to be expected to take stances on him? And I think it puts him in a tough spot.
We should also say that Kemp is testifying before the Fulton County District Attorney today in this broader investigation into potential election fraud. Do you think that plays a role at all? First of all, the fact that Kemp's not on the ballot. I mean, does that depress turnout for Warnock?
I mean, I don't think it helps Herschel Walker, certainly, that Kemp's not on the ballot. I mean, he buoyed Herschel Walker, I think, in this little election last week. I think the question is, does Donald Trump show up? Is Donald Trump going to be involved? I talked to a senator the other day supporting Herschel Walker, eager to help in every way, raising money for Herschel Walker, who said, if Donald Trump shows up in Atlanta or in the Atlanta suburbs, it is bad for Herschel Walker. Could sink Herschel Walker.
What happens if Ron DeSantis shows up? We would expect that he might and want to, right? Now, I assume, none of us really understand Trump psychology completely, but you would assume if Ron DeSantis showed up, Donald Trump would want to show up and one up him.
Oh, for sure. And I actually want to play some sound from Ron DeSantis in just a moment. Tia, take us inside Georgia politics, though, particularly when you have a runoff. These are voters who have been bombarded with ads, with campaign events. We obviously saw Warnock's strategy 2 years ago. Does he repeat that same playbook? What are you watching for in these next few weeks?
Yeah, runoffs in Georgia are all about turnout, and now under Georgia's new election law with a much quicker turnaround, the runoff window is condensed from 9 weeks to 4 weeks. That we would think plays, more into Republicans' hands than Democrats, because Democrats have always been challenged with turning out their voters for runoff elections. But again, the Trump factor, Herschel Walker's relative unpopularity, even among Republican voters, is a factor. So what we hear from Warnock is he's going around saying this is about competence and character. He said those words over a half dozen times each in his first speech after Election Day. So he's trying to make it about Herschel Walker, the candidate, being inferior, not prepared, not ready to serve 6 years in the U.S. Senate.
All right. Well, it is going to be fascinating to watch. Big picture here as we await this announcement by former President Trump. A lot of people are wondering, would he freeze the field? You brought up Ron DeSantis. Faiz, let me play you a little bit of what DeSantis had to say earlier this week, which made it pretty clear. He seems like he's getting ready for something big. Let's watch.
We focused on results and leadership. And, at the end of the day, I would just tell people to go check out the scoreboard from last Tuesday night. The fact of the matter is, the fact of the matter is, it was the greatest Republican victory in the history of the state of Florida.
Woo, those are fighting words, Stephen. What do you make of that?
Yeah, they are. I mean, look, there's been speculation among Republicans about whether Ron DeSantis is going to run. The argument for him running is this is his time. He clearly has this opening. He's growing. The victory he had last week suggests
this huge victory in Florida.
He could grow.
Yeah.
And he has support. I mean, he's competing head-to-head with Trump in the polling. Republicans are enthusiastic about it. The question basically is, does he have the nerve to do it?
And he's not tested. Ron DeSantis, one of the reasons why his margin was so big in Florida is because Florida Democrats are very weak. And so he didn't really have much of an opponent. The ticket was not strong to go up against the Republican ticket. That being said, yes, he's the it man right now. But going up against Donald Trump, he can ask fellow Floridians Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio. That's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. Faz, there's this sense that Trump is wounded right now, particularly when you see the results of some of these Trump-backed candidates and when you see election deniers, a number of them with a resounding loss in these races all across the country. And yet, as Democrats watch all of this unfold, is there a risk in thinking that he can't do what he did in 2016, which is defy everyone's expectations?
If Donald Trump were to get the nomination and be a general election candidate, don't take him lightly. He's won the presidency one time. You have to take that very seriously. Appeal to white working class people is real. I just think that, a wounded Donald Trump is going to fight ugly. And we've seen it before. We saw it in the primary in 2016 where he took on Marco Rubio, little hands, and then all that stuff about, Ted Cruz's wife and parents. It's going to get ugly with DeSantis. And the question for DeSantis is, the nerve question is right. Do you have a glass jaw? Or even in that clip that you showed, he doesn't mention Trump by name.
Right.
At some point, he's going to have to figure out what is your message, because Trump's got 35 to 40% of that base locked. Yeah. How do you speak to those people that starts to turn them?
And Trump already has a name for him, Ron DeSanctimonious. Let's talk about what's happening on Capitol Hill with our remaining few minutes here. The fact that you have Rick Scott announcing a challenge to McConnell. What do you make of this, Stephen? How significant is it? Are you surprised, and does he have a shot?
I don't think it's that significant yet. I think this is Rick Scott's personal ambition. He's made no secret that he's been a critic of Mitch McConnell. He wrote an op-ed a couple months ago, very critical without naming McConnell. I think this is about Rick Scott. There's some other people who have called for delaying these leadership elections. I think most of them running for president, most of them wanting hits on Fox.
Yeah.
That's what I think is going on. But the longer this is delayed, the more it has potential to be a problem for McConnell.
Yeah, it doesn't seem right now that Rick Scott is any competition really for Mitch McConnell. But he can make things interesting for a few days or maybe even a couple of weeks if McConnell agrees to delay until Alaska and Georgia are settled. But Rick Scott isn't even popular among Senate Republicans right now. He didn't have the most successful run as NRSC chair this year.
All right. Well, we have so much more to discuss, but we are out of time. Thank you all for being here. Great conversation, Tia, Faz, and Stephen. Thank you. And thank you for being with us this hour. Chuck will be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. Hallie Jackson picks up News Now coverage right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.